Bienvenidos, fans of the hottest entertainment on the planet. Jaime En Fuego here, and I welcome you to a special bit of analysis that I am doing about the 2014 film from writer-director Damien Zefron, and it is a 6 anthology tale entitled Relatos Salvajes. And so this is a film from Argentina that made some big buzz and a splash on the international market because of the fact that it debuted at the Cannes Film Festival, one of the most prestigious in the world, obviously, in France. And it was actually nominated for their highest award at that festival, which is the Palme d'Or. Didn't win, unfortunately, but that really set the stage for all of the attention that Damien's film was going to get over the course of, making its proper theatrical release. And then, in turn, when the award season came around in the early months of the following year, 2015, because this was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film in the United States for the Oscars, and it also was nominated and won the Goya Award in España, in Spain, and so that's essentially their award for the best Spanish language film that was not produced in their own country, so it won that award, and it also won the best non-English language film award at the BAFTAs, which is essentially the UK equivalent of the Oscars as well. So it was titled Wild Tales in the United States and English-speaking areas, and yet the interesting thing enough, when Damien was doing that press and stuff discussing the film, he had actually wanted the title to be Savage Tales, which, interestingly enough, when it was released in France and French-speaking areas of the world, it was called Les Nouveaux Sauvages, and so the new savages essentially. So in some areas of the world, he was able to get that particular wish. Now, Zefron already had some acclaim going in his home country of Argentina before the release of Wild Tales. He had done 2 features already. One was called El Fondo del Mar, the other was Tiempo de Valientes, and he also had some celebrated television work that actually was remade in some other areas of the world, like Russia, for instance. But this was really his big coming out party as far as on a global scale, and I think the biggest reason for that is because of the fact that this handles the topic of both justified rage and also the arrogance of social level, whether it's wealth or, clout as far as like power and things of that nature. But it does it with such a sharp, cynical, and hilarious sense of humor. Now, it's not for everybody, obviously, because this is most definitely an R-rated film, but I really feel that the handling of these intense topics and what happens when we tap into that primal level of sorts, the things that we are not necessarily supposed to be embracing and doing, that's what made this film so transcendent and so relatable across so many different countries around the world.
Lo único que se te ocurre es insultarlo.
Te estoy diciendo que el cordón estaba sin pintar.
¿Sabes que sos un negro resentido? ¡Forro!
So as what's evident from the vibe in that small portion of the trailer that I just showed is the fact that, yes, these are tales of revenge, but there is, as you can tell from the music that was chosen, a aspect of whimsy to the proceedings, and that's really what makes the juxtaposition of these dire circumstances and yet the dark comedy that is kind of balanced with it work so very well. And ironically enough, when Zefron was speaking with the Hollywood Reporter in December of 2014, he said that all of these had the capacity to be their own feature films at one particular time, but as he said, and I quote, "I kept nothing but what was essential to the character, the scene. The result was a bunch of very powerful short stories. I thought of it like Pink Floyd's The Wall, songs that add up to an album." And I personally think that approach is rad. The Wall is one of the, if not most, just pivotal albums as far as a concept that unifies a bunch of different ideas together. And so you can really tell in this film that those themes that are very much of a retort of justified rage, but also that arrogance of social level come through in the 6 different stories that we see on screen. Sometimes these themes overlap, sometimes they are presented with a little bit more seriousness and a little bit less comedy. Sometimes things do actually end fairly well for certain characters when they embrace this inner sort of anger, and then there's others where it couldn't have ended in any sort of worsely ironic sort of state. Now, if you want to talk about a wonderful introduction to this juggling act of both humor and borderline horror, you can't get better than how this film commences. And it's with a segment called Pasternak, and it's the only one that didn't have to be actually changed, for English-speaking audiences or whatever, because of the fact that Pasternak is a character that is never seen in this segment, but ironically enough has a connection to everybody that is on this flight going out of Argentina. And so there is a former lover of his, there is a former classical film critic that actually just savaged, there's that word again, his work upon submission. There's former classmates, teachers, a boss from Home Depot, and all of them have apparently wronged this character in some particular fashion. And I don't really want to completely spoil what transpires in this, but yeah, he is on the plane along with these other people, and we talk about just... Obviously, it's a check your brain in at the door sort of situation with this sort of angle and everything, but it is done so hilariously, and yet the fear of all of these people when they realize the connection that they all share and how they all have strange circumstances upon actually getting onto the plane as well. This segment is so effective in the fact that all of these people have wronged the title character in this segment, and it is, dare I say, a very fulfilling end to this plane ride. Then our second segment comes into play, and you notice right away that there was like a bright vibrance to that previous segment, Pasternak, but in this one, Los Ratas, the rats, it gets to a like dark, stormy night, almost has kind of a noir sort of vibe in the fact that there's this woman, she's at a diner, and one of the most relatable things about these stories are that these scenarios could play out anywhere in the world. I think that's why this movie traveled as well as it did, was because of that fact. But so it's shot in a drastically different style. This woman at a diner, she has a customer come in, the only guy who's in there, and she remembers him because he has ties with mob bosses and essentially forced the sale of their family home. Her father killed himself. He tried to come on to this woman's mother after the suicide of the father. It's just such a dark scenario, and the cook at this small place where she is a server is essentially saying we need to poison this guy's food, rat poison being where the title comes from. But it also has that double meaning in the fact that he is a rat, just scumbag to this woman. He is insulting her constantly, doesn't know who she is, obviously, despite the fact that she remembers him. And this is where the whole class warfare bit really comes into play, and the entitlement of the rich, and the fact that he feels like he can be so insulting and so demeaning to her with no idea about the full extent of the consequences that could potentially happen, because he's just completely oblivious. And it is that state of arrogance which we have in so many different places. And so this is one of those dual stories in the fact that there is the righteous rage, and yet we also have that dynamic of just the, I guess, DGAF, to use a abbreviation without getting profane, nature of a lot of people who just have wealth and have power. Getting to our third installment entitled El Más Fuerte, the strongest, who is the stronger of the two, so to speak. One thing that Damien Zafron actually mentioned during an interview with the Boston Globe, that was from early 2015, shortly before the film was competing at the Oscars, he said that a lot of his own personal experiences are on display in this film. The next two segments, most notably because he related at one point that he did have a road rage sort of situation. It's taking a little bit of inspiration from Duel, the Spielberg classic that was made for TV, but this is about a rich, very entitled sort of dude who's in his beautiful vehicle, and he's on the highway in what could be any highway in like the Southwest where I live, and so it has that sort of relatability. But he runs afoul of a guy in a beat-up old vehicle, and then in turn he breaks down shortly thereafter, and the confrontation that comes thereafter just escalates and gets worse and worse and worse. And so when he was on set and actually filming this bit, he relates further to the Globe the fact that while he had written it as being very serious with like a slightly dark comedic tinge, when he was actually talking with his crew, his cinematographer, and everybody else, he was describing it as like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. And you really, as things just get zanier and zanier throughout this massive bit of nastiness that goes down between these two people of differing social levels, you see kind of the gray area of the righteous rage, because both characters have it to some degree, and they essentially become victims of their own overzealous nature, each of them, despite the fact that there is, the social class dynamic going on between the two of them. In the end, they both end up so much worse for wear because of the fact that they let that almost orgasmic sensation, as Zafran describes, giving into this sort of rage, this sort of desire for revenge. It gets the best of them, and they are definitely, as I said, not in a particularly decent state after this really boils over. Now, what I think is actually the funniest of all 6 of these installments from just a purely comedic standpoint, and as far as lack of carnage, I guess, in comparison with a lot of these other stories, is Bombita. This is another one that Zafran related to the Boston Globe in early 2015, was based on personal experiences of his, and it's so funny in the fact that this tackles that power and social class sort of thing, because in this installment, we see a guy who has the power to destroy entire buildings at his fingertips, reduced to, near nothing, based on just his vehicle getting towed and having to deal with these DMV people and get his vehicle back when he had parked it in spots that he claims were not actually marked accordingly for him to know that he couldn't actually have his vehicle there. And so it is really just embracing that inner rage as well. So it has this guy who is very entitled and thinks that he should be able to not only get his vehicle back without paying fines, but, also be given an apology. The demands that he makes to these very just borderline inconsiderate, but yet just very funny, I'm doing my job, whatever, just leave it alone. The entire dynamic of this segment is one of the most absolutely hilarious. And the way everything spirals within his family, his job, all from, he goes from having so much and, just being so much higher on that proverbial social ladder, and then he is just knocked down to next to nothing. However, he also embraces that inner rage and takes revenge and uses his distinctive abilities to kind of extract that revenge in a very tactful sort of manner. This is one of my absolute favorite installments, and especially with when this guy embraces these feelings, how it actually in some ways works to the better for him is, for my money, just one of the most entertaining aspects in not just this tale, but in the entirety of the film. Next up is the segment of the film that I personally find the darkest, and that's probably why it has the least amount of comedic punch, and that's because the scenario is the most horrible. There is a rich family whose son goes out to a bar in Argentina, gets a little fadey, and then he proceeds to drive his vehicle back and runs over and kills a pregnant woman, leaves the scene, no witnesses, and so there is a scramble to figure out how they can cover this up and find a patsy who turns out to be somebody who has worked for the family for a number of years. And the humor in this, in such a nasty situation, and seeing how the rich and entitled feel like they can get away with just about anything, is the fact that as the father is trying to orchestrate all of this with his lawyer and with the private prosecutor and all this different stuff, everybody starts to get greedy. It's almost like, the crows, circling a carcass, or, like there's chum in the water and all the sharks start to show up. That is what makes this segment funny. And yet, even in that aspect, it's not anywhere near as uproarious as many of the other segments, because of the fact that this is, in my estimation, the most serious subject. It's the least cartoonish out of all of them, and it hits hard. La Propuesta, it's a banger, and it ends unexpectedly viciously. So from the proposal, which was the English translation of our previous segment, we get to the culmination of a proposal in a wedding and the madness of the after party that goes down. And in the jumping of tones and styles and everything like that I mentioned earlier in this video, this most definitely goes from the borderline deathly seriousness of the previous segment to something that is a little bit more lighthearted, in the fact that hasta que la muerte nos separe, that this is essentially till death do us part. And this is one of those scenarios that has probably been spoofed in its fair share of films and television and whatever other sorts of creativity and storytelling. But this is about a bride who finds out that her husband, during the reception afterwards, has got down in the biblical sense with a guest at their wedding. So not only did he have the audacity to cheat, but he had even more to invite this person along with his other co-workers to watch their nuptials and, drink and eat and have a jolly old time. And so understandably, as you can see from this image of our bridezilla, she flips and has this crisis of confidence, and everything just gets wackier and more over the top from there. She has a little dalliance herself in trying to just seek some sort of revenge, and this is very much of the righteous revenge. But it is also a snapshot of a rich, entitled family, two of them presumably intermarrying, and how maybe this guy was under the impression, because, my family's rich and so on and so forth, and I have, we have property, we have investments, all these different things, that, even I can be afforded this sort of thing because of that social class. And yet she is filled with as much rage as somebody in her situation has every right to be feeling. And yet the finale to this is maybe in contention for the funniest just scene of the entire proceedings in Wild Tales, because it did not conclude how I was assuming, especially after her reaction to this revelation. It's bloody, it's funny, and the performance from our lead actress here, actually, of all of the different stalwarts of the Argentinian film scene and television and stuff, all of the familiar faces, she was the one who, when this was on the awards circuit, gained the most recognition and reception of awards and everything, and very, very much with good purpose and very deserving reason.
That's the way nature works. You have this tension, and the release of tension provokes pleasure. And I would say that there's a lot of violence in the film, but also the people laugh out loud in the theater. So to me, this film is about the pleasure of losing control, the pleasure of reacting towards injustice, towards aggression.
Yes, the pleasure of witnessing these sort of reactions was most definitely quite profound, and that's why the film gained such notoriety. And in my estimation, it's very much like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, like Mary Poppins sort of situation. And that's because without the humor, I don't necessarily know if these scenarios could have just cut to the core for viewers quite as well as they did. And excitingly enough, just last year, Zafran was actually talking about the fact that he has a bunch of ideas for a sequel anthology, which is tentatively titled Wild World. So who knows how much bigger, maybe it's not just all in Argentina, or the guy has developed science fiction films and westerns. I mean, who knows if it could be, not in modern times, the future, the past. I mean, there's so many different exciting possibilities with approaching this sort of subject matter in this tone, and yet still having so much depth as far as social commentary with how we react to things and how we deal with these sort of stressful situations, whether we're being oppressed by those of a higher social class, or whether it's just, your own interpersonal relationship with, a coworker or a lover or whatever it may be. Significant cheers to Damien and the incredible job that he did with Relatos Salvajes, and many thanks to everybody. A grande gracias, as I always like to say, for all who checked out this video. And until next time, hasta luego, cinephiles, and I hope to speak more with you soon. Adios.